that the Egyptians were killed through their own firstborn, because when news was given over that the parents refused, so the children started to fight. A great war broke out between the sons and their fathers, and many Egyptians fell on that day. Now that year, the year of the Exodus, the calendar, it fell like this year. Pesach was on Thursday. That means that the day that the children of Israel were preparing their lamb for the Paschal lamb offering as prescribed in the Torah prior to the Exodus, that it should be done on the 10th of Nisan. Usually the Paschal lamb offering, how come it's every... Should we wait?
Good idea. It's also very unclear. The sound is coming and going.
Let's see if we can get it sorted.
So when you were explaining why this particular Shabbat is so special, some of the words didn't come out, so I couldn't quite get it. So maybe it's a good idea to wait a couple of minutes till people come on and begin it again.
We'll wait again.
There's a few more people trying to get on.
While we're waiting,
yes,
Rabbi, could you tell me what are the best Tehillim to say for people who are ill? I mean, I don't want to be saying like 20 Tehillim, so could you advise me what I should be saying?
Correct. Okay. Well, there is chapter 20, there is chapter 91, and chapter 130. Those are three main chapters.
Okay.
Those are the three main chapters. There are others, but you can start with those.
Once I've done those, what else do you advise?
Well, if a person is critically ill, if you know the name of the person.
I've got all the names of all these people.
Right. So if you're praying for for an individual who you know their name, their Hebrew name, so when you get to chapter 119, you will notice that there are 176 verses in chapter 119, and it's divided according to the letters of the alphabet. Every 8 verses is another letter. So you spell out the person's name. So let's say if the person's name is Sarah, so you read the 8 verses that pertain to the letter Sin. It's all in alphabetical order.
Okay. Fine.
Then you read the 8 verses that pertain to the letter Resh. Then you'll read the 8 verses that pertain to the letter Hey, that spell out her name, Sarah. Sorry?
But you don't do that with the 20, 91, 130. You only do it with 119 and some of the other ones.
No, in 119 is the only chapter that incorporates the entire alphabet 8 times. So you got 8 verses beginning with the letter Aleph, followed by 8 verses beginning with the letter Bet, following by 8 verses beginning with the letter Gimel.
Okay.
Until you get to 8 verses that begin with the letter Tav. So each verse begins with a letter of the alphabet, and it goes in the order of the alphabet, if you get me, multiplied by 8.
I understand, yeah. It's fine, thank you.
Right. Anyone else coming on?
Yeah, I'm here.
We don't see you.
That's right, because I don't have a camera.
And Susie? She came on, but we don't see her.
I think they're the few that don't have cameras.
And Mandy,
I'm here.
we don't see you.
I can see me.
All right. Okay.
I
Fine.
can see you.
I can see you.
Right. Fine. So anyway, that year, the 10th of Nisan, which was the day that they were preparing their Paschal Lamb offering, fell on Shabbat, like the way it does this year. And this is what attracted the Egyptians, because the lamb was their idol, and they see that the children of Israel are beginning to prepare the lamb, and they're asking them, what is it, what's going on over here? And the children of Israel are explaining to them that this is a preparation for the Exodus. Soon is going to be the plague of death of the firstborn. When they heard that, they went against the apparent Shabbat before Pesach. It's called Shabbat Hagadol, the Great Shabbos. Practically speaking, what do we do to commemorate Shabbat Hagadol? There is a custom to read the Haggadah on Shabbat Hagadol. This, even if we're not going to be in the synagogue, you can do it at home. You take out your Haggadah. In some Siddurim, you have it printed in the back of the Siddur. There's a section of the Haggadah from Avadim Hayinu, from the paragraph after the Manishtana, the response to the Manishtana, which begins with Avadim Hayinu, we were slaves in Egypt, until the end of Dayenu, the paragraph following Dayenu, which concludes with the words L'chaper al avonotenu, which is the bulk of Magid. All that is read on Shabbat Hagadol after Mincha. So that gives us a preview, I guess, to the Haggadah, so that by the time we get to the Seder, we're all ready. Another important thing that everybody needs to know is about Mechirat Chametz. We're going to be sending out the forms on the email, and you'll be able to email it back. There's no need to do it in person. It's perfectly all right to send it over by email. Just fill out the forms as soon as you get it, the sooner the better, and send them back. It's very important that you do fill out a Seil of Chametz form, because the prohibition of Chametz is not only that it's forbidden to eat Chametz, but it's forbidden for a Jew to have Chametz that they own in their possession. So if the Chametz is not owned by you, it could still be in your possession, but you're not allowed to own it. And therefore, to make things simple, we find somebody to act on our behalf, to be our agent. And in most communities, the way it's done is the rabbi is as an agent for people of his flock, and the rabbi is your agent. The rabbi finds a Gentile who he knows, and he does a deal with a non-Jewish person before Pesach, on Erev Pesach, who purchases the Chametz. He actually gives a deposit, because we're obviously not going to be able to assess the worth, the value of everyone's Chametz, but he does give a genuine deposit for the Chametz, and for rent, for the space where the Chametz is being stored. And this transaction takes place on Erev Pesach in the morning. And after Pesach is over, the rabbi buys back the Chametz, and the Gentile earns a profit. So it's a genuine transaction which is done both ways, going before Pesach and after Pesach. After Pesach, the rabbi buys it back, and then everybody could have their chametz again. So it's important that everybody sells their chametz. We ask that everybody should send in their forms before April the 7th, so that we make sure that we have all the forms in on time. The search for the chametz got to be done on April the 7th in the evening, Tuesday evening, before Pesach. And on Erev Pesach, you got to stop eating chametz by 10:53, the latest. The time of burning of the chametz is 12 o'clock the latest. You got Eruv Tafshilin this year because Erev Pesach is on Wednesday. Yontif is Thursday and Friday in the diaspora. The 2 days of Yontif precede Shabbos. The law is that although you're allowed to cook on Yontif, you're only allowed to cook on Yontif for the honor of the Yontif. You're not allowed to cook on Yontif for any other meals that are other than the purpose of Yontif, even in honor of the Shabbos. So how are people going to have fresh food in honor of the Shabbos if they're not allowed to cook on Yontif? You can't expect people to have food that they've honored for the Shabbos. So the idea of Eruv Tafshilin is that you start the cooking for the Shabbos already on the Wednesday. And based on the fact that you've already started the cooking for the Shabbos on the Wednesday, the rabbis permit us to continue cooking for the Shabbos even on the Yontif. So we'll be allowed to cook our Shabbos food on the Friday, even though it's Yontif, it's the second day of Pesach, based on the fact that we already started our cooking for the Shabbos on the Wednesday. So what you got to do is you take a hard-boiled egg, you cook up an egg, and you take a matzah. So it's something significant. It's a portion that a person could have a meal on, and you set it aside. And you look in your siddur, you'll see it's printed in all the siddurim towards the end near the Yontif section where you have, it's called Eruv Tafshilin. There's a special bracha that you make when you set it aside, a matzah and a hard-boiled egg, and that's going to be eaten on the last meal of Shabbat. And based on the fact that you set aside that matzah and that hard-boiled egg that you prepared on Wednesday for the Shabbat, then you could cook all your other food for the Shabbat on the Yontif. These are just a few special mitzvah this year, because this year Yontif is Thursday and Friday. Same thing happens whenever Yontif precedes the Shabbos. This mitzvah is called Eruv Tafshilin. Okay, now, at the Seder, we have 3 matzot. There's the 3 matzot have names. They're called Kohen, Levi, Israel. The top matzah is called the Kohen, like the highest category amongst the Jewish people. The middle matzah is called the Levi. The last matzah is called the Israel. Now, generally speaking, when we set up the Seder plate, you might assume that since the Kohen is considered the greatest, Levi is like second in command. Levi gets the second call up, and the Israelites, and ordinary Israelites, only comes third. And therefore, the top matzah indeed is the Kohen, and the middle matzah is the Levi, and the lowest matzah is the Israelite. But interestingly, in Chabad, when we set up the Seder plate, we actually place the matzah, the first matzah that we put into the Seder plate is the Israel. We work our way up. We start with the bottom matzah, we put the bottom matzah into the Seder plate, and then we put the Levi, and then after that, we put the Kohen on top. So of course, the Kohen is on top, and the Levi is in the middle, and the Israel is at the bottom. But the order, the way we put it in, is that we start with the Israel and we work our way up, rather than starting from the top and working our way down. Because a Jew should always go up from strength to strength. If you take the words Yisrael and Levi and Kohen, you have an acronym. The Yud of Yisrael and the Lamed of Levi and the Kaf of Kohen makes the word Yelech. One shall go from strength to strength. Okay, so that's why we have the 3 matzot. Usually, every Yontif, every Shabbos, and every Yontif, we have Lechem Mishnah. We just have 2 loaves of bread. Why at the Seder we have 3? Well, 2, we just answered the question. Every Shabbos and Yontif, you have to have that and Yontif. On Pesach, we get an extra piece, a third matzah. Why? Because there's an obligation to eat lechem oni, an obligation to have poor bread. The Torah says on Pesach, you shall eat poor bread. We're soon going to read about more about that in source 1. But when the Torah tells us you shall eat poor bread, one of the interpretations of poor bread is a poor man can't afford an entire loaf. Since the children of Israel, when they were enslaved, they were considered poor. Therefore, we commemorate that. On Pesach, we eat a broken piece of bread. And this is one of the reasons why the middle matzah gets broken. So that at the time that we make the hamotzi, there is a broken piece of matzah that we make the hamotzi over. So on the one hand, we still have 2 complete matzot, because there is an if you can only have 1.5, it defeats the purpose. You're not fulfilling, you're not commemorating the miracle of the manna. Therefore, you need to have also the third matzah. This way you have both, the 2 complete loaves and also a broken piece to commemorate the idea of the poor bread. So here you have the first source where we give the introduction to the Haggadah. We say, Hey lachma anya, or ha lachma anya. According to some versions, it's ha. According to some versions, it's pronounced hey. This is the poor bread, the achalo avatano ba'ara de Mitzrayim, that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. This is how this section of Magid, the very first paragraph of the main section of the Haggadah. Haggadah is called Haggadah, coming from the verse, V'higadet alavincha bayom hahu, you shall tell your child on that day, you shall give him tell him the story of the Exodus. That's why it's called Haggadah. The word Magid, which is that section of the Haggadah, in which we tell the story of the Exodus, begins with this introductory paragraph. So, I'm asking you something. Tell me, what's that supposed to mean? This is the poor bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt. Is that true? They ate matzah in the land of Egypt? Yes?
No.
Since when did they eat matzah in the land of Egypt?
But the sort of bread that they always ate in that part of the world is very similar to matzah, only it's not quite as crunchy. It's
Perhaps, okay, but that's not matzah. You're admitting that that's not matzah.
But the same, okay, it didn't have the 18-minute rule, but it was still the same sort of bread. It was just this had the 18-minute rule to it.
Right. But obviously, when we're saying this is when we're talking about the matzah on our Seder plate, we're talking about the 18-minute matzah, and we're saying this is the matzah that they ate in the land of Egypt. And it isn't.
No.
How do I know that it isn't? The Haggadah itself tells us that it isn't. Look at source 2. A little bit later on in the Haggadah, also in the section of Magid, it comes a point in the Seder where we point to the matzah. Some people actually hold the matzah in their hand when they say it. Some people, our custom in Chabad is we don't hold the matzah in our hand, we just point to the matzah. And we say, but everyone says this paragraph. It's printed in all the Haggadot. It's universal. And this is what we say. Matzah zu shanu ochlem al shumah. This matzah that we eat, what does it commemorate? And we say, it commemorates the fact that the doughs of our... Does anyone want to read it? Who would like to read it? Anyone? Tony?
It commemorates the fact that the dough of our ancestors did not have a chance to become leavened before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself to them and redeemed them, as it is written. They baked matzah cakes from the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, because it was not leavened, for they had been driven out of Egypt and could not delay, and they had also not prepared any other provisions. the Haggadah.
Okay.
I don't understand, because they knew days before, they knew exactly what was going to happen. So they weren't in such a rush because they got together all they took all the silver off the Egyptians and so on. So what was this business about a rush out of Egypt?
Yeah, because true, they were informed of the imminent exodus, but when it came about in a sudden mad rush. In other words, as God told Moses, that when the time comes, not only they're going to leave Egypt, but Pharaoh is going to chase them out of Egypt. You see, and this is where they were taken by surprise. Pharaoh actually drove them out of Egypt. He told them, rush, get out quickly, because he was afraid for himself. He himself was a firstborn, and he saw that all the firstborn were dying. And therefore, he wanted to get them out of there quickly. He was watching his own back. He was worried. He was that scared. God spared him. God actually spared Pharaoh. Pharaoh was lucky. Why did God spare Pharaoh? Because God wanted Pharaoh to witness all the wonders and miracles that would take place at the time of the splitting of the sea. God wanted that Pharaoh should see the downfall of his people. So this is why God spared Pharaoh. But Pharaoh had no clue that he was going to be spared to witness it. And he was worried that he himself is going to die. So he was trying to get them out as quickly as possible. And that's why in the middle of the night, he was trying to chase them out. So in actual fact, the children of Israel were being rushed out of Egypt. And as a result of them being rushed out of Egypt, they didn't have time to bake their bread properly. This is the story that's written in Exodus. It's actually quoted in the Haggadah. The Haggadah, it's the original source isn't the Haggadah. As you can see, I give you the source, Exodus chapter 12, verse 39. And we quote it in the Haggadah. When we point to the matzah, we say that this is actually the reason why we eat the matzah. So if it seems very clearly, the source states that they ate the matzah when they were driven out of Egypt, and they once they were driven out of Egypt, and that's the whole reason why it wasn't leavened, because it didn't have time to rise. Had they not been driven out of Egypt, it would have had time to rise. It wouldn't have been matzah. Now they've driven out of Egypt. They had matzah, and when did they have matzah? When they left Egypt. It says clearly, once they left Egypt. And so why do we say at the beginning of the Seder in source 1 that this is the poor bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt? Which way was it? So there are a number of answers to this question. I mean, which question doesn't have more than one answer? One rabbi will give one answer. You don't like that answer, there'll be an alternative answer. There'll always be more than one answer. So if you don't like one answer, you're bound to like another answer. The truth is, all the answers are true. There are different levels of understanding. There are different layers of meaning. And on a certain level, every answer is true. V'shiv im panim la Torah. There are 70 layers of meaning in the Torah. And in a certain sphere, in a certain time, in a certain place, every interpretation has its time and place. So basically, for example, the Maharal of Prague says that we could reconcile it very simply, that geographically, even when the children of Israel were released from slavery, it doesn't mean that they were already out of Egypt. They started traveling, they may have left their homes, but they were still in the land of Egypt for a while. It took time, as you know, until they reached the Red Sea, until they reached the Yam Suf. It took a week. And all these places that they were traveling until that point may have all been, at least some of them may have been within the land that was geographically Egypt, even though they were already released from bondage. So when it says in source 2, that they baked the matzah cakes because they were driven out of Egypt, I mean, does that necessarily mean they were driven out of Egypt geographically? We're talking over here, you have to understand the context. Over here, we're referring to the fact that they were released from bondage. Yes, that's true. Pharaoh drove them out of Egypt in that sense, but they still weren't out of the borders of Egypt geographically. That's why we say they ate matzah in sourceful way, how it could be reconciled. Right? On a deeper level, if you want to understand it on a deeper level, in Hasidic teachings, it explains that, yes, the children of Israel may have left Egypt. Yetziat Mitzrayim has taken place. Excuse me. Yes, Yetziat Mitzrayim may have, the exodus of Egypt may have taken place. However, the purpose for which the children of Israel left Egypt was that they should receive the Torah. As God told Moses at the time of the burning bush, when you will leave Egypt, you will come to serve God on this mountain. That's a purpose for which they came out of Egypt. So until they reached Har geographically, they may have left Egypt. Okay, according to the morale, it means they didn't leave Egypt geographically, they only left bondage. But let's say even when they did leave, even if they did leave Egypt geographically, did they leave the culture of Egypt, the mentality of Egypt, the environment of Egypt, the culture of Egypt, the way of life, everything that they were taught in Egypt? In other words, in the words of our sages, at the time that our ancestors were enslaved in Egypt, it wasn't just a physical bondage, it was also a spiritual bondage. Spiritually, they became enslaved because they assimilated and they learned from the ways of the Egyptians, unfortunately, with the exception of the tribe of Levi. Most of the children of Israel had assimilated, so they were spiritually defiled. And this is the reason why there needed to be a 7-week period between the exodus of Egypt before they could receive the Torah. It couldn't just happen overnight. It couldn't just happen simultaneously because they had to become spiritually prepared. They had to get ready for the giving of the Torah. And therefore, yes, they may have left Egypt physically, but spiritually, the impurity of Egypt was still stuck to them. They were still spiritually defiled because they haven't refined themselves yet. They haven't undergone any spiritual refinement to get themselves ready for Matan Torah yet. And until Matan Torah, in that sense, until they reached Sinai, they were still in Egypt. There was still an element of Egypt that was stuck to them. And that's why, even though in source 2, as it says, they only ate the matzah once they were driven out of Egypt, we still refer to it in source 1 as the bread of affliction that they ate in Egypt. Because spiritually speaking, children of Israel were still in Egypt. They were still in Mitzrayim. The word for Egypt in Hebrew is Mitzrayim, which means which comes from the word Meitzar, Meitzarim, borders, boundaries. They were spiritually restrictions. Anyways, now the matzah. We'll move on to the 4 cups of wine, which is the rabbinical injunction. Matzah is a biblical commandment. We're commanded to eat matzah on the night of the Seder. But then you have the 4 cups of wine. which is a rabbinical injunction. Now, why do we have 4 cups of wine? So there are many reasons why we have 4 cups of wine. The most common reason that is known is that the 4 cups of wine correspond to 4 expressions of redemption, 4 promises of redemption in Exodus. The first, God says to Moses, "Vehotzeti, I will take you out from Egypt." The second, "Vehitzalti, I will save them." The third, "Viga'alti, I will redeem them." And the fourth, "Vilakachti, I will acquire them as a nation." So corresponding to the 4 promises of redemption, the rabbis have instituted the tradition of drinking 4 cups of wine. There are many, many other reasons. The Midrash tells us that it corresponds to 4 decrees that Pharaoh made against the Jewish people. Number 1, that they should work. Number 2, that the children should be thrown into the Nile. Number 3, not only that they should work, but he gave them back-breaking work. He made it difficult for them. He tortured them. And number 4, he cut their supplies. There are 4 stages in the decrees of Pharaoh. Corresponding to each of the stages of Pharaoh's decrees, we have the 4 cups of wine. There's also a midrash that links the 4 cups of wine to the story in Genesis. You remember that story in Vayeshev with Pharaoh's, with the butlers and bakers' dreams, and Joseph interprets the dreams. So the cup of Pharaoh is mentioned 4 times in the verse. Corresponding to the 4 cups of Pharaoh, we drink 4 cups of wine on the night of Pesach. Alternatively, the Jerusalem Talmud tells us that it relates to 4 cups of retribution, which God will give the nations of the world, 4 kosot of puranut, cups of retribution. God will punish the nations of the world that hurt the children of Israel throughout history in the time to come. And likewise, God will give 4 cups of nechama. In Isaiah, you have 4 cups of consolation that God will give children of Israel to drink. So these 4 cups relate to that. Mystically, we're told that the 4 cups of wine relate to the 4 letters of the Tetragrammaton. So there are many, many reasons that are attributed to drinking the 4 cups of wine. I want to share with you another interesting reason over here we have in source 3. You know something else that we do at the Seder that's connected with number 4, and that is the 4 sons, right? So in Chassidut, it explains that the 4 cups of wine are also linked to the 4 sons. Now, before we see how it works, let's first read through the source, and then we'll examine how the 4 cups of wine relate to the 4 sons. So, could we have a volunteer to read source 3? We'll begin with 3a. Anyone?
Chacham, Mahu Omer, the wise one, what does he say? Meha'edot hachukim v'hamishpatim asher tzva Hashem Elokeinu etchem. What are the testimonies, the statutes, and the laws that God, our God, has commanded to you?
Fine. Okay. Anyone want to read the Russia? It's nothing personal. Nothing personal. If nobody wants to read it, if you all think the Russia is so bad, then I'll read it. I won't make anyone feel bad.
Rasha Mahu Omer, the wicked one. What does he say? Ma ha'avodah hatzot lachem. What is this service of yours? He says of yours, implying that it's not for him. By excluding himself, he denies the essential principle of Judaism, the obligation to fulfill the commandments of the Torah. You should also blunt his teeth, meaning admonish him, and say to him, it is because of this that I would fulfill his commandments, such as Pesach, Matzah, and Morah, that God acted for me when I left Egypt. The verse, if he, the wicked child, had been there, he would not have been redeemed.
Okay, before we continue with the other 2 sons, I just want to make 2 observations. Number 1 is notice how in the original Hebrew, the Haggadah does not say, what does the Chacham say? Or what does the Rasha say? And likewise with the simple son. The question is written in an odd manner, grammatically. It should have said, Ma ha-Chacham omer? What does the Chacham say? Like in English, also it should have said, what does the wise one say? Or what does the wicked one say? No, the way it's presented, both in the original and the way I translated it, because that's the way it's written in the original. First, the Haggadah tells us the name of the son, the title. We're talking about the Chacham, the wise one. And then the question is asked, what does he say? And really, why Taka does the Haggadah do it in that way? The words of our sages are so precise. They've meticulously chosen this wording because they want to convey another message. Chassidut explains, it's not just to tell us what the Chacham says or what the Rasha says, but there's another message here. Look at it carefully. Chacham mahu omer. A Chacham mahu, what he is, omer. That's what he says. Just if you punctuate it slightly differently and place the comma after the word who, so there's a pause between the word who and omer, both in the case of the Rasha and in the case of the Chacham, you get a different meaning. Chacham mahu omer. Whatever one is, if you're a Chacham, then you speak that way. You speak words of wisdom. If you're a Rasha, you speak in an evil manner. Huh? You say what you are. You express that which is within, that which lies within, that's what gets expressed verbally. So it teaches us the importance of speech. People have to be careful with what they say. One shouldn't say dismiss and say, "Oh, it's only your words. I only meant a joke. Oh, I take it back." And first of all, in Judaism, we know we have to be accountable for our words, and we have to try to be wise. And that's why the Chacham is placed first in the order of the four sons to teach us that we got to exercise wisdom, and that's the example that we need to follow. Nevertheless, the Rasha is also very significant. And in fact, in a sense, he has even more significance than the Chacham, as we're soon going to see. Before I explain why the Rasha would be even more significant than the Chacham, I just want to make another observation regarding the expression of blunt as teeth. We should know that it's not to be understood literally. That's why I put in the brackets, admonish him. But why is the expression nonetheless in the original Hebrew, hakei et shinav, which knock out his teeth, blunt his teeth? I don't know. Generally, that's a common expression in the Bible, a tooth for a tooth, and we know that the oral law does not interpret it literally. Similarly, over here, it means words of admonishment. Nevertheless, this is the expression that gets used. So there's an interesting explanation why this expression is being used. Because the word Rasha has in it three letters, a resh, a shin, and an ayin. The shin is right in the middle of the word Rasha. Rasha means an evil person. A shin, which is the middle letter of Rasha, also means a tooth. Okay? Shinayim are teeth. Basically, a shin, the shape of a shin is, you look in the Hebrew alphabet, you all know, a shin has three heads. It represents the three patriarchs. We know that when it comes to the evil tongue, if you want anyone to believe you, you got to put an element of truth. Like when you want to say something bad, when you want to badmouth somebody, God forbid. If you're just going to slander somebody and make up a story, nobody's ever going to believe you. But when you put in an element of truth, then people buy your story because, well, that makes sense. And once you said something is true, so there's a foundation of truth, so the whole story now has it has an element of truth upon which the rest of the story could base itself on. So that's what the Russia does. He takes one element of truth, and based on that, he goes about and commits all the crimes that he wants in the world. This is what the spies did. They didn't just come back and make a bad report about Eretz Israel. They actually said something which was true. They started off by saying the land is a very good land. It's flowing with milk and honey. But, blah, 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 they went on and they badmouthed Eretz Israel. So, why didn't they just come out straight away and say all the terrible things that they wanted to say? Why did they have to first say that the land is a very good land? Because otherwise nobody would believe them. You put in an element of truth, and that's what all the liars do. They put in one element of truth, and that's how they trick people into buying their story. And that's what the Rasha does. So you got to knock out the shin, which represents the element of truth in the Rasha's complaint, and then it becomes clear what he's all about. Then you're left with once you knock out the shin, you're left only with the resh and the ayin. And when you're left with the resh and the ayin only, what does that make? Together?
Ra.
Ra. Ra. Oh, that's clearly bad. Anybody, when you see the word Rasha, not everybody understands that it's bad. People, not everyone realizes it because you got the shin right in the middle of it. So it's not noticeable that it's bad. But once the shin is out of the picture and you're only left with the resh and the ayin, it becomes clear that it's bad. So that's why we say knock out the shin, and then the Rasha will have no grounding. He'll have nothing, no element of truth to base himself upon. So we tell him that he would be excluded. Had he been in Egypt, he would have been excluded. That's why the verse says in Exodus chapter 13, verse 8, that God acted for me, and we say the emphasis is that it's for me and not for him, because had he been there, he would have not been redeemed.
One of the Egyptian gods was called Ra.
Sorry, correct, very good. Oh boy, yes, you're right. You're absolutely right, yes.
I can't remember.
You remember that from the Seder a few weeks ago. Very good.
No, it wasn't from the Sedra. It was from something from the London School of Jewish Studies hundreds of years ago.
Right. Wow, you have a fantastic memory. You see, that's the way. That's really the way we all need to learn. We should always remember the things that we learned even many years ago. I'm amazed. Wow. But that's true. That's absolutely true. We read it in Beshalach just a few weeks ago. Anyways, so as I'm going to show you something very, very interesting over here, I especially gave you the sources where these verses for the Chacham's question and for the Rasha's question and for the Tam's question, not just to show you, that I'm not making it up, but that you could look it up afterwards and find it in your Chumash, but there's a reason why I want you to see where these sources are. Notice that the Chacham's verse is from Deuteronomy. Okay? The Rasha's is from Exodus. Now let's come to the Tam. Tam Mahu Omer. The simple one, what does he say? Mandy, you want to read it?
With a strong hand, God took us out of Egypt. You must open up the conversation for him. As it is written, you shall tell your child on that day. It is because of this, that is the mitzvah of Pesach, Matzah, and Maror, that God acted for me when I left Egypt.
Okay, so now what do we have over here? So we got 4 sons. But where are all these verses from? Some of them were the same verse. The Rasha's verse, the response to the Rasha's verse is chapter 13, verse 8, which is the same verse as in 3D, the verse for the one who does not know how to ask, in verse 8. So the response that the Haggadah tells us that we should respond to the Rasha by quoting that verse is chapter 13, verse 8, the very same verse that the Haggadah uses that we should open up the conversation for the son who does not know how to ask. That's interesting. Why is it the same verse if it's 2 different sons? That's number one, we need to understand. Number two, the verse for the Chacham, as we pointed out, is in Deuteronomy, which is the 5th Chumash. It's only the 5th Chumash, Chumash Devarim. That's where the verse for the Chacham appears. The second portion of the Chumash of Devarim, chapter 6, verse 20. Whereas all the other sons are in Exodus. And interestingly, the question of the Rasha out of the other 3 sons is the very first question that appears in the Torah. The question, Ma havodah hazot lachem, what is this service of yours, appears in Exodus chapter 12. Whereas all the other verses appear only in chapter 13. Look at the verse for the simple son in 3c. It's in chapter 13. Look, go down to 3c, and you'll see. See? Chapter 13, verse 14. Both the question of the simple son and the response that you should say to him is in chapter 13, verse 14. Whereas the question of the Rasha is in Exodus chapter 12. It comes before the question for the simple son. And the response is also before the response for the Rasha is also before the response of the simple son. It's the same response as this response of the son who does not know how to ask. Chapter 13, verse 8, a couple of verses before chapter 14. So why is that? Why is it that the response for the Rasha appears in the Torah even before the response for the Chacham? Isn't the Chacham more important? After all, don't we say there are 4 sons and we put the Chacham first on the list?
Yeah.
So why, when it comes in the Torah, we don't see that it's in that order. We see that the Chacham only appears in the Torah at the end of the Chumash. And the Rasha, his question is mentioned first out of all the 4 sons.
But those others, not the Chacham, the others are more likely, by the time they have to commemorate this particular time, they're not going to remember the whys and the wherefores, and generations are going to go past and they'll have lost the tradition. And that's why this so-called wicked one is going to say, what is this service of yours? Because he's not going to remember where it all started and where it all came from, and who created the world and who pronounced all this and who saved them from slavery. Whereas the wise one, down the generations, he will remember because he will have learned.
Right, okay, that's a novel approach. That's a novel approach.
By the time this is all happening, at the time when God is telling them to prepare to leave Egypt, whereas in Deuteronomy, it's, they've already about to leave the land or left the land, and it's really, it's a different generation anyway by that
In
time.
Deuteronomy, it's 40 years later.
So it's not the original children or the original sons. It's the next generation. It's the ones who've been born in the desert.
So
they've learned the traditions, whereas this one, the wicked one, according to where it is in the Chumash or in the Torah, it's happening right at the time when they're leaving Egypt. He's already saying, what's all this?
Are you quoting this from someone? Are you quoting this from a source?
No, I just looked up which bit of the whole thing it was in.
All right. Anyway, it's a novel approach. It could be that there is a commentary that might suggest that. I'll have to look around and see if one of the commentaries suggests that. It's very likely that one of the commentaries do suggest that. But I don't remember offhand. That possibly that might be a legitimate approach, but I can't comment just offhand on the moment. I'll have to come back to you on that. Anyways, what I want to share, the thought that I want to share with you is a thought that that the Rebbe explains, and basically, I just want to preface one more question. Just excuse me a second. Yeah, so I just want to preface one more question before we get to the answer, and that is, to strengthen the question, I mentioned before that Chassidus says that the 4 cups of wine correspond to the 4 sons. Now, we know, so let's see how it works. We got 4 sons. In the order that they are presented in the Seder, the Chacham is mentioned first. The Rasha, the wise son is mentioned first. The wicked son is mentioned second. The Tam, the simple one, is mentioned third. And the one who does not know how to ask is mentioned fourth. Now let's see how it works with the 4 cups. If we say the Chacham is the first son, that means the Chacham corresponds to the first cup. Well, what do we do over the first cup? With each of the 4 cups, we do another mitzvah at the Seder. Which mitzvah do we do over the first cup? Anyone?
Can't think.
What's the mitzvah? Sorry?
Bravery Hagafen.
So what's that mitzvah called? Besides Borei Pri Hagafen, what's the mitzvah that we do?
Kaddish.
Kiddush. We make Kiddush over that first cup of wine. Very good. What mitzvah do we do over the second cup of wine?
We wash.
The wine.
Now, of course, each one of the 4 cups of wine has wine, but in other words, there is a certain mitzvah that we got to do on the night of Pesach.
So it's the Manish Tana.
You're going on the right track. The mitzvah of reading the Haggadah. When we read the Haggadah, we're actually performing a biblical commandment. There is a commandment in the Torah that we are told that on the night of Pesach, we are commanded to tell the story of the Exodus. You shall tell your son on that day the story. Tell him. He'll ask you questions. You got to tell him the story. So there is a mitzvah to tell. There's a mitzvah to speak. In fact, that's also why it's one of the reasons why it's called Pesach. Everyone says Pesach means Passover. That's the simple reason. Pesach means Passover because God passed over the homes of the children of Israel during the time of plague of death of the firstborn. But there's also another reason why it's called Pesach. Pesach is an acronym for 2 words. Pesach, a mouth that speaks. On Pesach, it's a mitzvah to speak, because we are commanded in the Torah, "V'higada talamincha," you shall tell your child. Even if a person is sitting all alone, God forbid this year, if we're going to be trapped in our homes, and there'll be many people, unfortunately, that are lonely, that don't have anybody to share. It says if some people won't be with their children, so it says the wife should ask the husband in a situation where there are no children sitting at the table. And if a person is sitting all alone, God forbid a person doesn't have a wife, so a person should ask the questions to God Almighty. Everyone has to ask the questions. And then, following the questions, we have to read the answer. We have to tell.
Story.
There's a mitzvah to tell the story. That's why it's called Haggadah. It comes from the word Vehigadata. So that's the mitzvah that we do over the second cup of wine. We fill the second cup of wine not just before we drink it. We fill it before the manishtana, before the questions are asked. And we read the whole response over that cup of wine. And only after we finish reading the answer to the questions, that's when we drink the second cup of wine. So there's a mitzvah of the second cup of wine that's reading the Haggadah. What's the mitzvah over the third cup of wine?
Benching.
Benching, grace after meals. That's a biblical commandment. And what's the mitzvah over the fourth cup of wine?
To say next year in Jerusalem.
Close. But what do we do before we say next year in Jerusalem? There's a mitzvah. The recitation of
Hallel.
Hallel. The recitation of Hallel, that's a rabbinical mitzvah. It's a rabbinical injunction. So each cup has its own mitzvah. Now, I'm asking you, which one of these takes up the bulk of the Seder night?
The narration of the story.
The narration of the story. That's clearly the bulk of every Haggadah that takes up the most pages of the Haggadah is the section called Magid.
And that's the second one.
Kiddush only takes up one page.
So
Even if a person is a chazan and he sings the Kiddush very slowly, how long will he sing it for? How long is the Kiddush going to last? A minute? 2 minutes? How long will it last? Haggadah already takes time to read through all the pages of Magid. It takes time. Even if you're a fast reader, it takes time. Benching, it's 2 pages. It takes time. Even if you sing it, it doesn't take as long as Magid. And similarly, Hallel, even if you're going to sing it, it won't take as long as Magid. So the bulk of the Seder is which cup of wine?
Number 2.
The second cup, which corresponds to
Wicked son.
the wicked son. Does this make sense?
Yes, because he needs more of an explanation.
Okay. So basically, you got the point. Chassidus teaches us, when you see a Rasha, don't say, I don't want to know. I don't want to know him. He's a Rasha. He shouldn't be a Rasha. This guy is terrible. On the surface of things, isn't that what we're doing? We admonish him and we say that had he been in Egypt, he would be excluded. But there are different ways how you could admonish people. You could admonish people in such a way that you lose them, or you could admonish people in a way that you bring them back. By giving him the message that had he been in Egypt, he would have been excluded. What we're saying is, had he been there, he would be excluded. Ilu hayasham. Had he been there, he would have been excluded. But now we're not there. Now we're here. Now we're getting ready for the forthcoming redemption, for the ultimate redemption. For the redemption of Mashiach, the prophet says, Lo yidach mimenu nidach. No one will be left behind. No Rasha in the world, there will be no one that will be excluded. So, but that depends on us. That depends on our attitude. We have to help the Rasha. And that's why the Rasha is given a very prominent place at the Seder. We're not gonna treat him like an outcast. We're not going to say, well, we're not letting him in because he's a Rasha. And that's why, so you might ask, so how do we reconcile that with the fact that the Chacham at the end of the day is the first? At the end of the day, the Chacham has to lead the way. The Rasha can't be the leader because he simply doesn't have the knowledge to be the leader, and he's no example. It would be dangerous for the Rasha to be number one. He's clearly not the example for people to follow. So the Chacham, who is the example for people to follow, corresponds to the first cup. He leads the way. But straight away, the next is the Rasha. He gets the most important part of this, the most attention at the Seder. Why the Tam, arguably, why are we only giving him the third cup? Because the Tam isn't so dangerous. It's not so urgent to deal with the Tam like it is to deal with the Rasha. The Tam is a simple person. He's harmless. So it's much more pressing that we deal with the Rasha. It's much more critical that we deal with the Rasha first, and then we could deal with the Tam. And then clear, even the Sheino Yedei Alishal, the one who doesn't ask for sure is harmless. He can't even open his mouth. So he's clear, so for sure there's no danger there. So that's why we leave him for the end, because he's least critical. But in a sense, each son has their place. Each one has their own virtue, and we should never put anyone down. Each one has their own specific virtue, and therefore each one of them corresponds to another cup, right? But this comes from the Rebbe's teachings. The Rebbe tells us that, on the contrary, one who thinks that the Rasha needs to be thrown out, needs to be rejected, is missing the whole point of the Seder. On the contrary, the Seder is a special opportunity that allows us to bring every Jew in, even the Rasha. And on the contrary, not only even the Rasha is brought in, but he's given the greatest attention. And with the Seder is an unbelievable opportunity that could bring the Rasha back. And that's why we seat him next to the Chacham, so that he should be able to learn from the Chacham. Right, any questions? Any questions?
No.
I'll probably think of one in the middle of the night,
Right,
and then I'll write it to you.
right, right. I want to comment also on I think Tony read this source too, the expression of that the dough of our ancestors did not have a chance to rise before the King of the Kings of Kings, the Holy One, blessed be He, revealed Himself. What's the meaning of this expression, the King of the King of Kings? The first king is obviously a reference to God, who is the King of the Kings of Kings. But who are the kings of kings? Who are they referring to?
Pharaohs?
So it doesn't just say he's the King of Kings. If you say Hashem is the King of Kings, so you say you would understand that means that he's the king of all human kings, like pharaohs. Okay, but over here it doesn't just say the king of the pharaohs. It doesn't just say the king of the kings, that God is superior to Pharaoh. If that was the meaning, it would be sufficient to say he's the King of Kings. Why does it say the King of the Kings of Kings? Well, besides the kings down here on earth, human beings, human kings, kings of flesh and blood, even Gentile kings such as Pharaoh, who God is a king of all those kings, there's another category, not God and not human, and they are the kings of kings. And God is the King of the King of Kings. Who are these kings? It refers to the angels. The angels are called malachim, right? Angels. Many people confuse it with melachim, which means kings. In actual fact, it's a different spelling. Melach. And Shalom Aleichem confuse malachim and malachim. Melech malachei hamalachim. There's different malachim. We're talking about the King of Kings. But in actual fact, the angels are also called kings. The malachim, they are also milachim. In some places, they are referred to as kings. Why are they referred to as kings? Because God assigned them.
Sounds gone.
Time up. Hello? You see?
Hello.
Yeah.
We couldn't hear you. We lost you.
Now you hear me?
We can now.
Anyways, the kings of kings, it means that God is the king not only of human beings, but he's also the king of the kings of kings, which is a reference to the angels who are, God appointed them, so to speak, to be kings over human beings. Because God has assigned to them, like there's an angel over Russia, and there's an angel over England, and there's an angel over Egypt, and there's an angel, and when it's when God when it says in the verse that we read before the Shira, Vayar Yisrael et Mitzrayim, that the children of Israel saw Egypt met al Sefat Hayam, it doesn't only mean that they saw the Egyptians dying, but it means that they saw the angel of Egypt. The Midrash tells us that the angel of Egypt descended from on high, and he tried to protect the Egyptians. He tried to fight for the Egyptians, to fight against the children of Israel, and God knocked him down as well. And he also fell, and the children of Israel could see with their eyes. God opened up their eyes that they should be able to see Mitzrayim, the angel of Egypt, perishing, falling before their eyes. So, at any rate, each country, each nation has their angel who is like the king. The angel, God, is the administering angel that is in charge of all the well-being, all the welfare, and all the needs of that particular nation. And therefore, they are called kings. And God is the king of them as well. That's why he's called the King of the Kings of Kings. Any other questions? All right. Look, let's hope and pray that, please God, those that need a refuah shalema should have a refuah shalema. Unfortunately, the list is growing. We know even in the Chabad community, we hear terrible things from New York and from Israel. It's very, very serious what's going on in the world. And we got to thank Hashem every day that, that we're being protected. And we got to pray for the future, that we should all be protected. And that, please God, very swiftly, this disease should be removed from the face of the earth, and that our Torah study that we're studying over here in our own homes, and we're gathering together, should be a merit for all those that need a refuah shlema. And please God, as I said last week, if anybody needs anything, if you know anybody that needs anything, please don't hesitate to let us know. Within the next few days, we have hand-baked shmura matzah that's sealed in vacuum-packed wrappers, so you don't have to worry about it. It's sealed packages that we're going to be distributing. And if you know anybody that needs, please let us know, and we'll send it on. We'll do it in a safe way. We'll have it delivered to people's doors in a way that we don't have to meet them personally, and people will be able to get their packages. And the Zohar tells us that that matzah also has healing powers. In addition to the fact that that when one eats matzah on Pesach, on mitzvah, mystically,